I stood there in the doorway, holding a bottle of cranberry wine in one hand and a pie dish in the other, waiting for someone, anyone, to welcome me. But the house was dead silent. No laughter, no clinking dishes, no smell of turkey, just Victor, sitting alone in the dimly lit living room, wrapped in a blanket, and a folded note on the mantel that had my name on it. The second I opened it, my world tilted. Brady, my husband, had gone on a Caribbean cruise with his ex, and apparently, I was now responsible for taking care of his stepfather for the weekend. On Thanksgiving, I couldn't even process the words. At first, I reread the note 3 times, hoping it would change. But no, there it was, in his neat, detached handwriting. Take care of Victor. I'll explain later. That was it. No apology, no emotion, just betrayal baked into indifference. I sat down next to Victor, still stunned, and he didn't say a word either. He just looked at me with tired eyes like he already knew. That was the moment I realized I had been left behind, emotionally, physically, and financially. What kind of man chooses his ex over his wife for Thanksgiving? I asked myself that all night. He thought I would stay. He counted on my silence. But my silence was my answer. I was nothing to him, not even enough to lie to properly. He just vanished, like I was the help. And there I was, wiping down kitchen counters and checking Victor's medication schedule instead of clinking glasses with family and carving turkey. She cried in silence. That was me, a shell of someone who once believed in forever. I went to the guest room and just sat there, staring at the floral wallpaper like it held the answers. I couldn't sleep. I kept picturing Brady on that cruise, laughing, drinking, holding her hand. Did he even feel guilty? Did he plan this? Of course, he did. You don't accidentally book a luxury cruise during Thanksgiving. This wasn't a mistake. This was betrayal disguised as a vacation. It was strategic, cold, and I was the collateral damage. Victor didn't say much the next day, but he didn't need to. Every glance between us carried a silent understanding. We'd both been abandoned, and somehow in that loneliness I started to notice things, like how Victor's medication bottles were almost empty, though they should have lasted weeks, or how there were unopened bills stacked on the coffee table, some with big red stamps that screamed, "Final notice." Something was off, really off, and I could feel it crawling under my skin. That afternoon, I scrolled through Instagram, and there they were, Brady and his ex, smiling in swimsuits, sipping cocktails on a deck surrounded by blue ocean. I found the messages too, DMs between them going back months. He broke me first, long before this cruise, but he never saw it coming, what I'd do with that pain. So I showed him the proof, screenshotted every message, archived every post. If he thought I'd just sit there, he didn't know me at all, was deceived but not destroyed. There's a strange kind of clarity that comes with betrayal. It's like your heart stops apologizing for feeling too much. I started writing things down, details, dates, words he used, ways he disappeared even while he was still present. My gut told me this wasn't just about the cruise. This was deeper. There was a story behind this story, and it started long before Thanksgiving, and I wasn't going to let it stay buried. By the second night, Victor finally spoke. He's been gone a long time, even when he was here, he said softly. That one sentence shattered what was left of the illusion, and I knew we were both survivors in the same house of ghosts. The house echoed with betrayal, not just romantic, but familial, the kind that leaves scars you don't see but feel every time you walk past a family photo. He betrayed me? Yes, but I wasn't alone in that. Victor's words stuck with me. There was something about the way he said it, so measured, so intentional, like he'd been waiting to be asked. And when I finally did, "Has this happened before?" he nodded, slowly. That's when it all started unraveling. She planned it all, he said. Brady's mother, the silence, the financial draining, the neglect. And suddenly, I wasn't just heartbroken, I was curious. I wanted the whole truth to come out, because betrayal isn't just a story, it's a spark. It burns down illusions and clears space for something raw and real to take its place. That night, I stopped crying and started listening, really listening, to Victor, to my instincts, to the uncomfortable silence between lies. And that silence, it wasn't empty anymore. It was charged, ready, waiting for the next move. By the third day, I stopped checking my phone hoping for a message. There was nothing, no apology, no explanation, not even a lazy excuse. But then, out of nowhere, I got tagged in a post. It was Brady's sister, showing off their spontaneous family cruise. And there he was, my husband, holding hands with his ex in front of a beach sunset like they were some fairy tale reunion. My stomach dropped. He never saw it coming. The moment I discovered that he'd flaunt his betrayal so publicly, so shamelessly, I felt like I'd been punched in the chest. I zoomed in on the photo just to make sure it was really him. I know that sounds crazy, but when someone betrays you this deeply, your brain tries to protect you by denying what's right in front of your face. But there it was. Brady in swim trunks he bought for our last anniversary trip, smiling like a man who'd never made vows. That was the moment I stopped wondering what went wrong. I found the messages, and they told me everything. Their DMs were a digital trail of deception. He told her I was clingy, manipulative, and too emotional, that I wouldn't make a scene if he slowly started distancing himself. He thought I would stay, that I'd just keep playing house while he played God with my heart and our bank account. And the worst part? He had already moved nearly, all our savings into a separate account weeks before the cruise. Every dollar we worked for, gone. That wasn't heartbreak, that was financial warfare. It's hard to explain what betrayal does to your body. I wasn't just sad, I was sick, physically nauseous. I'd walk into the kitchen and forget why I was there. I stopped eating, couldn't sleep. My hands trembled when I held my phone, afraid of what I'd find next. I was nothing to him. That realization hit harder than any photo ever could, and once that truth landed, I couldn't unsee it. Every text, every fake smile, every dismissive laugh, it all made sense now. Victor noticed. "You're quieter than usual," he said, and I almost laughed, because I had never been this loud inside my own head. My thoughts were screaming. The silence around me was only on the outside. Inside, it was chaos, and yet there was a strange power brewing in it. My silence was my answer. I didn't text Brady. I didn't call his mother. I just watched, listened, took screenshots. He broke me first, but he didn't get to decide how I healed. That night, I stayed up researching our joint accounts, tracing every wire transfer. I found payments made to a spa in Miami, dinner reservations under both their names, even jewelry purchases that never made it to our house. He planned it all. This wasn't a midlife crisis. This was premeditated erasure. He wanted to delete me quietly while parading around like the good guy. But stories of betrayal never end quietly, and I wasn't going to let mine fade into silence. Started documenting everything, not just for myself, but for the truth. I needed a timeline, receipts, evidence, because one day, when the mask falls, and it always does, I wanted to be ready. So I showed him the proof. Not yet, not to him, directly, but I laid it all out, printed, organized, categorized. If you've ever been betrayed, you know that truth becomes your only weapon, and I wasn't about to go into battle unarmed. Victor watched me with this strange mix of sadness and admiration. He didn't say much, but I could tell he'd seen this before, maybe even lived it in his own way. That's when it clicked. This wasn't just about me. Brady's betrayal had roots, family patterns, cycles. Victor hinted at it. "You're not the first," he said quietly, "but you might be the last if you do this right." I didn't fully understand then, but I knew I had to stay close, to listen, to learn, because betrayal doesn't just shatter trust. It reveals systems, patterns of manipulation, silence, and emotional blackmail. And once you see it clearly, you can't go back. You can't unknow what you've seen. And in that way, betrayal is also awakening. It forces you to rise, not in spite of the pain, but because of it. I was deceived, but I wasn't stupid. And I wasn't alone anymore. Victor and I had both been left behind by the same people, maybe for different reasons, but the wound felt eerily similar. That's when the idea started forming. What if we stopped surviving and started exposing? What if we turned this mess into something that couldn't be erased? The thing about Victor is, he didn't ask for pity, not once. He just sat in his chair, reading old paperbacks and sipping lukewarm tea, like the world hadn't already discarded him. But something shifted after that cruise post went viral. He looked at me differently, like he knew what I had seen, what I had felt. One morning, while I was reheating his oatmeal, he said, "You know they've done this before, right?" I paused. "Who?" He stared straight ahead. "Brady, Elaine, all of them." And just like that, the silence cracked. He didn't speak like an old man ranting about his family. He spoke like a man who had waited too long to be heard. Victor told me stories, small ones at first, about birthday dinners skipped, medication forgotten, financial accidents that always cost him, never them. At first I chalked it up to aging, confusion, but then he pulled out a file folder from the back of a drawer. Dates, bills, voicemails, photos. I wasn't ready for what I saw. He had been documenting everything for years. It turns out Victor had been playing a long game. While everyone treated him like a forgetful relic, he was quietly keeping records. Every insult, every shady transfer, every time Elaine forgot to refill his prescription, he made a note. Every time Brady missed a bill he was supposed to cover, it went in the folder. I asked him why he never said anything. He just smiled. They wouldn't believe me, but maybe they'll believe you. And suddenly, I wasn't just the betrayed wife. I was the only witness that mattered. What struck me most wasn't the proof. It was the intention. Victor had been gaslit for so long that even he began to doubt his own memory. So he created a system. Notes on the fridge, photocopies in his sock drawer, password-protected voice memos. He was sharp, sharper than they'd ever given him credit. 4. And it hit me. He wasn't weak. He was surviving. And surviving in a house built on betrayal takes a different kind of strength. He broke me first too, Victor said one evening, out of nowhere. It wasn't about Brady, not entirely. It was about Elaine, about how she took control of everything after Victor's stroke, how she convinced the family that he couldn't handle finances anymore, how she slowly rewrote the narrative until everyone believed she was the caregiver and he was the burden. She cried in silence behind closed doors, but when she came out, she wore a saint's smile, and nobody questioned it. That moment felt like looking in a mirror. We were different generations, different stories, but the same theme: betrayal wrapped in politeness, abuse masked by good manners, and underneath it all, the cold, calculated belief that we'd never speak up, that we'd stay quiet, that we'd just take it. But Victor was done taking it, and so was I. He handed me a flash drive. "Just in case," he said. "I didn't ask what was on it. I just took it. I knew it mattered." There's a clarity that comes when you realize the lies aren't new, when you see that the web you're stuck in was spun years before you even walked into it. And that's what Victor gave me: context, history, patterns. Suddenly, Brady's betrayal wasn't random. It was learned, passed down. And maybe, just maybe, I had the chance to be the break in that chain, to not just react, but to respond with precision. Victor told me he had cancer 3 days later, stage 4, no treatment left, no timeline guaranteed. I didn't cry, and neither did he. We just sat with the truth. It was the only thing left that hadn't been twisted. "I'm not scared of dying," he said. "I'm scared of being erased." And that hit me like a freight train. Because that's what betrayal does. It tries to erase you, your story, your value, your voice. But we weren't going to let that happen. That night, we made a pact. No more silence, no more shrinking. We would gather every piece of truth we could and hold it in plain sight. Not for revenge, for dignity, for legacy, for the version of ourselves that had been ignored for far too long. This wasn't about burning everything down. It was about finally being seen, heard, believed. And the only way to do that was to start laying bricks, one piece of evidence at a time. Because once you see your betrayer for who they are, you start seeing everything. The manipulation, the smirks, the way they weaponize your kindness. And when that veil lifts, there's no going back, only forward. And forward meant we had to do something that terrified us both. I never expected to form a bond like that, especially not in the wreckage of my marriage, sitting beside the man my husband barely acknowledged. But somehow, Victor and I became allies, not just emotionally, but strategically. He wasn't just giving me sympathy, he was handing me the blueprint of a takedown, quiet, focused, and meticulous. We didn't talk about revenge with fire in our eyes. We talked about dignity, about truth, about showing them who we really were, beneath all the lies they wrapped around us. Every night after I helped Victor into bed, we would sit with notebooks and folders spread across the kitchen table, like detectives chasing a lead. I started to see patterns, transfers that didn't make sense, credit cards opened in Victor's name, medications inconsistently filled. I found the messages Brady had once hidden, laughing about sticking the old man in the corner and getting Jade to play nurse. That night, I barely slept. My silence was my answer, and it screamed louder than any confrontation could. Victor never once asked me to stay. He thought I would leave like everyone else did, but I didn't. I couldn't. Something about his calm, urgency stirred something deep inside me, like maybe I wasn't the shattered woman Brady left. I was someone new, someone harder to deceive. Victor gave me access to his lawyer, his medical files, even his digital passwords, and with each layer, we peeled back. I saw more than betrayal. I saw a family built on fraud. We weren't just documenting their neglect anymore. We were building a case. He exposed them to me piece by piece. She planned it all, Victor said of Elaine. Not just the finances, the manipulation, the guilt games. Every decision she made was precise, designed to keep him dependent and voiceless. And Brady? He had inherited that same cold efficiency. It made me wonder how many other stories of betrayal were buried in that family, waiting to be unearthed. Victor had a way of turning the darkest truths into small acts of resistance. He'd say things like, "If they're going to pretend I'm weak, let's make it our weapon." That shifted everything. We stopped reacting. We started documenting intentionally, with dates, with clarity, and we recorded video statements, proof, the kind they couldn't refute. So I showed him the proof of what I'd found too, the fake accounts, the emails Brady thought I'd never see. We shared everything, because now we had nothing left to lose. There's something powerful about being believed. Victor listened to me in a way no one ever had, not even Brady in the beginning. And I listened to him, not just as an old man with stories, but as a partner in a mission. I began to understand the weight of it all. He had been deceived for years, just like me. And in each other, we found the validation that betrayal had stripped from us. We didn't just want revenge. We wanted the truth to stand up and speak for itself. Victor made me laugh too. Even in the middle of this mess, he'd crack dry jokes about Elaine's Oscar-worthy performances or Brady's PhD in narcissism. And in those moments, I felt alive again. Like maybe healing doesn't always come with meditation and forgiveness. Sometimes it comes with clarity and quiet defiance. Sometimes it comes from sitting across from someone who understands what it's like to be discarded and choosing to rise anyway. I started recording audio logs of our conversations, not because Victor asked me to, but because I wanted to remember his wisdom, his pain, his ability to endure without bitterness. He once said, "Betrayal ages you, but surviving it, that's what makes you timeless." I felt those words settle in my bones. And maybe, through this strange alliance, I was learning how to survive too. Not just pass time, but reclaim it. The house we were in stopped feeling like a tomb and started feeling like a bunker, a place where truth was being prepared, not buried, where dignity was being restored one spreadsheet at a time. And I kept thinking, he never saw it coming. Brady thought he'd left me with a burden. Instead, he left me with a mentor, a co-conspirator, a mirror that showed me who I really was, someone who could fight back with facts, not fury. And as we grew stronger, we knew what had to come next. It wasn't enough to know the truth. We had to make sure they couldn't twist it. We had to leave something behind that would outlive us both. It was strange how a place that once felt so quiet started whispering secrets louder than ever. I couldn't walk through that house without stumbling into evidence of something sinister. Bills hidden behind books, expired medications stuffed in drawers, care instructions ignored. That wasn't forgetfulness. That was design. She planned it all. Every missed dose, every unpaid invoice, every delay, it was all part of a silent sabotage. And I was just starting to understand how deep the rot ran. Victor's home should have been a sanctuary, but it was rigged like a trap. Doors that didn't close right, a heater that barely worked, no safety rails near the stairs. All subtle signs that nobody truly cared whether he was safe. And when I looked closer, I saw the fingerprints of negligence everywhere, scratches on the bathroom floor where he'd clearly fallen, canned food way past expiration, medical appointments, canceled without his knowledge. This wasn't passive neglect. It was orchestrated abandonment. He told me stories of asking for help, only to be told he was dramatic or confused. I couldn't believe it at first. But then I found the voicemails. Recordings of him pleading for prescriptions followed by dismissive responses from Elaine. It was heartbreaking. Nobody believed her? No, nobody believed him. They'd built this illusion of being caregivers while slowly erasing his independence. And Brady? He was too busy betraying me to even pretend he cared. There was one drawer I almost didn't open, but inside it were old photos. Victor before the sickness took over. Strong, alert, proud, and next to them, receipts. Pages and pages of unauthorized purchases, jewelry, travel, expensive dinners, all charged to his account. I was nothing to him, Brady once said about Victor. And now, I finally saw what he meant. He had stripped him down to a number, a balance to exploit, a life to siphon until it was empty. And when I found the insurance policies, that's when everything changed. Elaine had listed herself as his sole emergency contact, despite barely speaking to him for months. She'd even added herself as a health proxy without his full consent. That was the moment Victor broke. I'd seen him quiet, even sad. But that day, he cried in silence. There was something so raw about it, so intimate, that I had to look away, because I knew what that kind of heartbreak felt like too. The worst part. Brady had joked about putting the old man in a home during a text to his ex. I found the messages late at night, rereading them like they might change if I stared long enough. But they didn't. He betrayed me. He betrayed Victor. And somehow he still thought I would stay. Like I hadn't already tasted the bitter truth. Like my silence was loyalty. But it wasn't. It was fury, compressed, concentrated, and waiting for the right moment to strike. Victor started to speak more clearly after that, less filtered, less polite. He told me how Elaine used to guilt him into giving her control of his money, how Brady once screamed that he was just dragging everyone down. The house became a confessional, and every room held a piece of the puzzle. What looked like clutter was actually chaos, engineered to wear him down until he surrendered, until he forgot that he ever deserved better. There was a bathroom cabinet filled with unused medical supplies, still sealed, still labeled. That shook me, because he needed them. He needed all of it, and yet they'd chosen to spend the money on cruises and designer clothes. She exposed him to danger, not just emotionally, but physically. And when she was captured on one of Victor's old voice recorders mocking his illness, I knew this wasn't just betrayal. This was cruelty with a smile. I started documenting everything, taking photos, logging dates, comparing pharmacy records, because if they ever came back to contest what we were building, they'd be met with facts, not rage, Not hearsay, but undeniable proof. The truth came out, little by little, like pieces of glass pulled from a wound. And Victor, he grew sharper with every revelation. Not weaker, not smaller, but more himself than ever before. Still, there was more buried in that house. More lies, more traps, more decisions made behind closed doors. And as we prepared to dig deeper, we realized something else. If we were going to dismantle the illusion they'd built, we couldn't stop with paper trails. We didn't just want the truth, we needed it to be undeniable. Victor and I sat down one night with a legal pad and a flashlight, listing every instance we could remember. Missed meals, ignored calls, medical appointments postponed for vacations. She planned it all. We weren't looking for pity. We were building a case, and every small detail, every overlooked slight, became a piece of a timeline that spoke louder than our pain ever could. I started taking photos of everything. The cracked tile he tripped on, the mold in the bathroom that was never cleaned, the receipts tucked under couch cushions. Every image told a story they thought would stay hidden. Victor would pose, not with sadness, but with quiet resistance. His frail figure near expired meds, his bruises documented, his voice, at times shaky, still delivered facts with a strength they never expected from him. He never saw it coming, but now he was ready to face it. We filmed videos too, long, quiet moments of his breathing while he struggled to sleep, his eyes reflecting the pain that his words sometimes couldn't catch up to. I'd ask questions off camera. What happened that day, Victor? He'd answer honestly. No drama, no exaggeration, just raw memory. And those videos, they became our truth. They became his voice in a house where he'd once been silenced. My silence was my answer when they asked why I hadn't left. But now, this was me speaking back. He told stories I never thought I'd hear from someone like him, like the time Elaine faked a heart attack to guilt him into transferring money, or when Brady accidentally lost his medical ID at a casino, draining $3,000 on a poker binge. He begged her to come back to sanity, to decency, but she was gone long before that. I was deceived into thinking this was just dysfunction, but no, it was betrayal. The kind that ruins your faith in people who share your blood. We charted a map of neglect, literally. On the wall of the guest room, I drew a timeline with string and post-its, dates, doctor notes, receipts, every manipulation, every coincidence. It was wild how it all fit together once we stepped back, how intentional it looked. He broke me first, Victor said one night about Brady. I didn't ask who he meant. We both knew. And we both knew this wasn't just about grief anymore. It was about reclaiming control. There was one recording that haunted me. Victor barely conscious, asking Elaine for his inhaler. Her voice snapped back, "You don't need it right now. Stop being dramatic." That was the moment I stopped giving anyone the benefit of the doubt. That was the moment I understood what people are capable of when there's money involved. And I promised myself I would never let someone treat my suffering like an inconvenience again. We brought in a friend of Victor's, an old neighbor who was once a nurse. She reviewed the medications. Her face turned pale. "This dosage is all wrong," she whispered. "This could have killed him." That sealed it. We weren't being emotional. We weren't exaggerating. We were staring at cold facts. I showed her the proof, and she didn't hesitate. She agreed to testify if needed. For the first time, someone believed us without us having to beg. Victor started sleeping better, not because he was physically stronger, but because emotionally, he was finally heard. That's something we don't talk about enough. How validation heals. How justice, even before it's served, softens wounds. We kept documenting, kept collecting, because if we were going to expose them, it had to be with their own shadows, not just our light. The truth came out, piece by piece, until it felt like we had an entire arsenal of facts. And still, I'd lie awake some nights thinking, how did I miss it? How did I not see this man suffering while I was consumed with my own pain? But maybe that's how betrayal works. It divides us, makes us feel like our wounds are isolated, when in truth, they're part of a larger, uglier pattern. I wasn't just Brady's victim. Neither was Victor. We were two people discarded by the same disease, selfishness disguised as family. We were almost ready. Almost. But there was one more piece missing. The voices of those who saw it but never said anything. And I had a feeling the neighbors had more to reveal than they'd ever dared before. At first, I wasn't sure anyone would care. You know how people are. They see something off, but they keep walking. But something changed once I started asking. I went door to door, carrying nothing but a notebook and a nervous smile. "Did you ever notice anything unusual with Victor?" I'd ask. And slowly, like thawing ice, the truth began to spill. One neighbor whispered, "He cried in silence. We just didn't know what to do." That shattered me. The woman across the street, Maria, was the first to really open up. She said she used to hear Victor coughing late at night, sometimes calling for help. I told my husband, but he said to stay out of it, she admitted, eyes low. I recorded her, with permission. She spoke softly, but every word had weight. He deserved better. I should have said something sooner. That kind of guilt, it echoes. But now it was also proof. Real, human proof. Soon after, an elderly man named Mr. Talbot came forward. He thought I would stay quiet, he said, referring to Brady. But I saw what they did. I saw Victor being left on the porch for hours in the cold. His voice shook with memory. He offered dates, details, even photos he had taken, not out of malice, but because something inside him had said, document this, and thank God he did. Those pictures became pieces of a puzzle that couldn't be denied. There was a shift in the air once the neighbors realized they weren't alone. One by one, more came forward. Notes left under my door, emails, phone calls, all of them said the yes, same thing. We saw, but we were scared. I couldn't blame them. Speaking up feels dangerous when the abusers hold power, but now that power was fading and truth was finding its voice, I was nothing to him. Brady had made that clear, but now I was a force. Victor cried when I played him the recordings. They noticed, he whispered, and I nodded, holding his hand tight. They did, and now they're telling the world. He couldn't stop the tears. This man, who had endured so much in silence, finally felt seen. And that mattered more than anything, more than revenge, more than justice. It was the healing he thought he'd never live to witness. Nobody believed her, he said of Elaine. But now, nobody believed her lies. We organized everything. Videos, written statements, timestamps. It was overwhelming, but necessary. Every detail mattered. Every shared memory became another nail in the coffin of denial Brady and Elaine had built. They had crafted a facade, but truth, when backed by a community, doesn't crumble, it detonates. And that's exactly what we were preparing for. Something irreversible, something that would echo far beyond that house. One of the most painful. Accounts came from a teenager next door. She said she once helped Victor up after he fell in the yard. He told me not to tell anyone. He was afraid. That stayed with me. What kind of fear does it take to silence pain? He betrayed me, I realized. Not just as a husband, but as someone who made me believe I was safe. And now, even kids could see the cracks in his disguise. That illusion was gone for good. We brought in a friend of Victor's from church, a man with legal knowledge. He helped us format the testimonies properly. We weren't just angry, we were strategic. And that distinction changes everything. People often mistake fury for chaos, but we were focused. Every word we gathered was deliberate. Every photo had a timestamp. Every recording had a story. And that story? It wasn't about revenge. It was about clarity. More than once, I caught myself thinking, what if this doesn't work? What if they twist it all? But that fear wasn't paralyzing anymore. It was fuel. We had the truth. We had support. We had momentum. Brady may have taken our money, our peace, our dignity, but he couldn't take the truth. And the truth was loud now. She exposed him with a camera. I exposed him with a story. And the neighborhood, they exposed him with everything in between. We weren't done yet, not even close, because while testimonies are powerful, legal documentation makes them bulletproof. And Victor, he had one last move to make. The day Victor updated his will, the air felt heavy, not sad, just significant, like the final piece of a plan sliding into place. He sat beside me in his worn armchair, hands trembling just enough to need help holding the pen. But his voice, steady, clear. This isn't revenge, he told the lawyer. This is me protecting what little good I have left. And I believed him. Because after everything, he broke me first, but Victor helped me rebuild. The will wasn't just about money, it was about recognition. He left a portion to me, yes, but also to charities that help the elderly, hospice centers, even a literacy foundation. I asked why that last one. He smiled and said, Elaine used to mock my stutter, told me I'd never be smart enough to teach anyone. I want to prove her wrong. That hit deep, because she planned it all. The neglect, the manipulation, the slow erasure of his dignity. We made sure the paperwork was airtight. Witnesses, video documentation, medical records. Everything signed, sealed, and protected. The lawyer, Mr. Halbrook, was meticulous. They'll try to challenge this, he warned, but this is built like a fortress. I felt that metaphor resonate in my bones. A fortress. One stone at a time, we'd built something that couldn't be knocked down by crocodile tears or fake apologies. Not this time. Then came the testimony. Victor, wrapped in a blanket, sat before a camera and told everything. His voice cracked, but he didn't stop. He named dates, described how Elaine would forget his meds, how Brady called him a drain, how they took control of his accounts under the guise of help. The truth came out in full color. They treated me like furniture, he said. And now they'll see how invisible I really wasn't. That line shook me. We edited nothing. Raw and real, his story bled into the lens like a confession and a warning. My silence was my answer for years, he said. But silence can also be a weapon. And damn, was he right. That man, dismissed, ignored, pushed aside, was about to become the loudest voice in the room. They had no idea what was coming. He never saw it coming. Well, neither would they, because this time, we were the ones holding the truth. It wasn't just legal, it was poetic. The very people who stripped Victor of power were now powerless to undo what he'd built. One clause in the will revoked any inheritance rights from Brady and Elaine, explicitly, not vaguely, not open to interpretation. It was like watching a chessboard flip. Checkmate, and they hadn't even realized they were playing the wrong game. Revenge? No, this was balance. Victor also requested a final letter, sealed, be left at the house for when they returned. He didn't want to speak to them. Let my words do it, he said. The letter was brutal, honest, but full of grace. You left me to rot. She didn't. That's the difference between family and blood. I placed it in the kitchen drawer he always kept his favorite tea bags in. Seemed fitting somehow. We backed everything up. 3 digital copies, cloud storage, flash, drives, one locked in a fireproof safe. I wasn't leaving anything to chance, because he betrayed me with a plan. Now I had one too, and mine didn't crumble in the sun like his lies did. Mine was rooted in truth, in evidence, in dignity. And Victor, he watched it all unfold with the quiet power of someone who knows they've finally won. The lawyer gave me a long look before leaving. You've done more than most would have dared, he said. And I didn't cry, not then. I felt ready. Ready for the fallout. Ready for the confrontation. Ready to say, so I showed him the proof, because I wasn't that abandoned wife anymore. I was the executor of a legacy, and that legacy, it was built on justice. And yet, Victor had one final moment left to live, one final chapter to write, and none of us were ready for how quiet and powerful his exit would be. The morning he passed, the house was quieter than usual, but not in a sad way. It was like everything paused to let him go gently. No alarms, no rushing, just sunlight streaming through the curtains, warming his frail hands. He had asked me, the night before, to leave the window slightly cracked. Let the breeze in, he whispered. I want to feel something real, and he did. That final breath felt like a soft goodbye, not just to me, but to the life that had tried to forget. Him. He died holding a photo of his late wife. I hadn't seen that picture before. Victor had kept it hidden, tucked inside a book. She believed in me, he'd told me weeks earlier, voice thick with emotion. Not like Elaine, not like Brady. And for a moment, I saw the man he had been, full of pride, hope, love. Nobody believed her either, he once said, but she kept loving anyway. That photo was more than nostalgia. It was permission to leave. I didn't cry right away. There was too much peace in the room, too much stillness. But then I noticed the cup of tea I had made for him, untouched, going cold. And that's what broke me. Not the silence, not the finality, but the fact that he wouldn't taste his favorite tea again. That stupid, ordinary thing felt unbearable. Like grief had chosen the smallest crack to pour through, and once it started, it didn't stop. I sat beside him for a long time, telling him things I wished I'd said earlier, how I didn't just admire him, I loved him. Not in the way you love a partner, but in the way you love someone who showed up for you when no one else did. He was the only one who hadn't looked at me like I was broken. He saw the fire still flickering, even when he thought I would stay down, and he made sure I didn't. After the nurse confirmed everything, I started the process we'd planned. Hospice had his paperwork. His burial arrangements were modest, just like he wanted. No speeches, he'd insisted. If they didn't listen while I was alive, they don't get to pretend now. That line cut deep, because I knew exactly what it meant to be invisible until someone needed something. He'd felt like nothing to them, but not to me. I lit a candle that evening, not out of tradition, just instinct. I sat in the dark with that candle flickering, feeling him in the silence, and it hit me. She cried in silence too. Whoever that woman in the photo had been, she had loved a man the world tried to erase, and I understood her more in that moment than I had ever understood myself. There's a sisterhood in grief, an unspoken bond between women who were left to pick up what betrayal shattered. The neighbors came by, leaving flowers, notes, even baked goods. One woman hugged me so tight I couldn't breathe and said, "He always spoke so kindly of you." I think that's when I lost it completely. Not because he was gone, but because someone saw our bond. Because someone outside that toxic family recognized what we had built. He never saw it coming, that Victor would find peace, dignity, and even legacy in the end. Later that night, I looked through the files again. Everything we'd prepared, everything we'd protected, and it felt like holding armor. I wasn't scared anymore. Not of Brady, not of Elaine, not of what they'd say when they came crawling back. Because they would. People like that always do. He begged her to come back, but by then, it's always too late. I whispered a promise into the dark before sleeping. I won't let them rewrite your story. I meant it, because what we built, this alliance, this justice, It was real. And just like he gave me strength when I needed it most, now it was my turn to be strong, to be relentless, to expose him, to finish what we started. And oh, did we start something they'd never recover from. But first, they had to walk through that door and find everything waiting. It had been days since Victor passed, and the family was still nowhere to be found. No phone calls, no emails, nothing, just silence. But that silence, oh, it was loaded with what was to come. When Brady and Elaine finally returned, they didn't even bother with the usual pleasantries. They strolled into the house like they owned it, like nothing had changed, like they still had control. I let them think that. I let them walk right into their own demise. As soon as they entered the living room, they froze. The first thing they saw was the letter. Victor's handwriting was unmistakable, his signature sharp, even in his weakened state. For Jade, it started, "You are my daughter, my legacy, the family I never had, the one they never saw." Then, a twist of fate. There it was, Victor's will, officially recorded, legally binding, right under their noses. They never saw it coming. Brady turned pale as he skimmed the words, his hands trembling. I almost wanted to laugh, almost, because that's the thing about people who think they can escape their actions. They always forget one thing: the truth always comes out, no matter how they twist it, hide it, or run from it. The truth has a way of showing up when it's least expected, and it hit them hard. Victor's will? Elaine scoffed. That's a joke, right? But it wasn't. I'd made sure it was as airtight as possible, and that's when the video played. The one where Victor, on his deathbed, looked straight into the camera and said the words they never thought they'd hear. They treated me like a burden. They took everything. They left me to rot. There it was, the proof. I'd showed them exactly what they'd done, how they'd made him feel invisible, like I was nothing to them. And in that moment, he became everything. I watched as the color drained from their faces. Brady's hands were shaking, and Elaine, well, Elaine was speechless. The woman who had made a career of controlling everyone in her path now had nothing to say, because, you see, when she was captured, there's no way out. They thought they could outrun their past, but here I was, standing tall, with all the receipts. Every lie, every manipulation, every piece of evidence. It was all laid bare for them to see. Then came the documents, photos, receipts, and a timeline of neglect. The text messages Brady thought he'd deleted, they weren't gone, not by a long shot. I found the messages, and I made sure they knew. Each one detailed the lies he'd told me, the manipulation, the way he'd siphoned money from our joint accounts to fund his selfish little getaway with his ex. They all told a story of betrayal. I could feel their desperation. It was palpable. Brady, the man who once thought he could control everything, was now crumbling. I could hear his voice, soft and pleading. "Jade, please, we can fix this." But it was too late. He thought I would stay. He thought I would just turn the other cheek, let it all slide. But I didn't. I couldn't. Not after everything they'd done. And then came the kicker. I stood up, walked toward the door, and as I turned the handle, I said the final words. This is what happens when you play with someone's life. You lose everything. And with that, I left them to face the consequences of their actions. I exposed him for what he truly was, a coward who thought he could get away with it. And when they realized the gravity of what was happening, it was too late to turn back. Walking away felt freeing. It wasn't just the end of a chapter. It was the end of an entire book, one I had never asked to be part of, but one I would finish, no matter the cost. I'd set the record straight. I'd showed him the proof. And in the end, it wasn't just revenge. It was justice. A justice that had been years in the making. One that I was ready to claim, no matter how long it took. But as I stepped into my future, I couldn't help but feel one thing: relief. The kind of relief you feel when you finally let go of a weight you didn't even know you were carrying. And yet, there was still something more to be done. There always is, isn't there? The real work begins now. I reached the point where all the schemes were starting to crumble. When Brady and Elaine returned from their escape, the house was empty, but somehow there was a weight in the air, something you couldn't ignore anymore. I knew this was the moment to expose everything they'd done. And oh, the irony of it all. They thought they could hide, that they could get away with it. They never saw it coming. It wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice, about them facing the consequences. When the family walked through the door, their faces showed surprise, but it was a calculated surprise, as if they already knew something was off. And right there, with the calm that only the truth can bring, I handed them Victor's letter. It was like a time bomb that exploded right in their faces. "You really thought you could play with my life like this?" I thought, watching their disbelief. Victor's video, documenting the abuses, was clear. His voice, recorded and cut at the most sensitive parts, laid bare how he'd been treated over the years. All those fake smiles, the manipulative conversations, the disregard for a human's dignity. Now, everything was exposed. and I wasn't going to care how much they tried to pretend it didn't happen. Victor, even at the end of his journey, had more dignity than anyone in his family. He wasn't around to defend himself anymore, but somehow he was more present than ever. He gave me what I needed, the chance not just to get justice for myself, but for him too. I didn't know what this ending would look like, but I knew it would be so much more than just exposing the betrayal. It would be about ensuring that the next generation wouldn't go through the same torment. Their properties were frozen, their bank accounts blocked. I watched the information leak to the public, and rumors spread fast. But what was most interesting was seeing how, as everything I did unfolded, I realized how much they had underestimated me. They really thought they could defeat me. They really thought I'd be the one on my knees. But now there was nothing they could do. Justice was being served, and I was in control. This wasn't just a story of betrayal anymore. It was about doing what was right. And in doing what was right, I made it clear that anyone standing by my side was worthy of honor, and those who were against me would be left behind. Brady and Elaine were cornered, and I knew nothing would ever be the same. No one would believe their story anymore. And at that moment, I understood the true meaning of a new beginning. I felt different, stronger, more aware of my own power. Things were changing, and now all I had to do was take the next step. Because life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. But one thing was for sure, I would never again be the victim. I would never allow myself to be made a fool of again. The control was back in my hands, and now I looked at them, and with a calm smile, I realized I was free. The weight was finally lifting. It wasn't about winning over them, but about the fact that I could finally breathe without feeling like I was being dragged down all the time. Now, I could walk alone, free and unafraid. The most remarkable part of it all, when I saw their reactions. I didn't feel anger, I didn't feel sadness. I felt a tremendous lightness, like all the weight I had been carrying for years had finally been lifted off my shoulders. Now, there was a new beginning, a new story I was writing, and they couldn't interfere with it anymore. I knew what was coming next. The battle was far from over, but the war was finished, and the truth had come out. Later, when the events unfolded, Brady and Elaine lost everything. The money they had stolen, the houses they had hijacked, even the dreams they'd built on, the pain of others. It all dissolved. And me, I kept moving forward, and I knew that I had done what needed to be done.